So, on the phone this afternoon, Dr. Ron Ehrlich. Hello, Ron. How are you?
I'm well, Brent. How are you?
Good, thanks, mate. Thank you for the books. We're going to give them away. What we've decided to do, Kelly, what are we doing? We're going to ask people to write in with questions for Dr. Ron. And best question wins a book. We post it out to them. We'll do one a week. We'll do one a week. You send the questions in this week, and we'll pick the best question, and we'll announce the winner of the book next week. We'll do it for 3 weeks. So that's, I thought, the way we do it. Ron, the title of the book is A Life Less Stressed. I tell you what, with the announcement today that all the rural areas are still in lockdown for another 2 weeks, Ron, boy oh boy, people could do with a dose of A Life Less Stressed, because I imagine at the moment a lot of people are feeling very stressed.
Yes, I guess so. And look, the book, as I've always said, is aspirational, as much for me as anybody. But, yeah, look, these are stressful times. But, again, it's often the way you look at things that can make a big difference. So that's something we do have some control over, how we look at it.
Is that like the grass is not always greener?
Well, a bit like that. I mean, we've kind of got used to looking at the world out there, but looking at what we have around us, immediately around us, if we've got a roof over our heads, if we've got food on the table, a job, someone to talk to, and we've got our health, then we're doing okay at that point. And actually getting more involved in the local community and getting people to know people next door rather than halfway around the world is a real positive as well. So, look, there are some positives that may come out of this. We're certainly going to be focusing on health like never before.
Well, as I it's been said by many people before, without health you don't have anything. You can have all the money in the world, but if you don't have your health, what does it matter?
Exactly.
Yeah. Speaking of health, you have good health if you have good nutrition. And it's not something that you can, I suppose, eat crap food. I think you get away with it when you're young. You can eat all the crap food in the world, like hamburgers, chips, you name it. Drink your Coca-Cola, do all that sort of stuff. But I think as we get older, we've got to start to realise you just can't eat that sort of food all the time. You've got to get into a habit of having a nutritious diet.
Well, Brent, you say that, but for example, type 2 diabetes used to be called, and so let me just say, diabetes has got two or three types. Type 1 is when you just don't produce insulin, but 85% of diabetics are type 2 diabetics, and that used to be called late onset diabetes, but that's just not the case anymore. We've got kids getting type 2 diabetes. So you might think you can get away with it, but the statistics are telling us even children's health isn't as good as it could or should be.
On your notes here about nutrition, you say low fat, high carb, low carb, dairy's good, dairy's bad, coffee's good, coffee's bad, red wine's good, red wine's bad, white wine's good, white wine's bad. There's always a study. Basically, there'll be one come out today and say that, a couple of glasses of red wine are good for you. And then there's another study comes out next week and says, oh, hang on, those couple of glasses of red wine that we told you last week were good for you, they're not good for you. I mean, we just keep getting this conflicting information about nutrition and those sort of things, don't we?
We do, and we get it about nutrition. We also get it about health as well. And I think what a lot of people don't realise is, look, when you're buying a car, when Ford tells you it's the best, they're advertising, and when Holden tells you that's the best, they're advertising, you're being sold to. But what you don't know and what you don't realise is that often a lot of health advice is actually marketing, and the role of industry in health messaging is it's very strong. So that's why it's not hard to find a study that will support almost any position you want to take. So that's why you've got to have some basic knowledge, and it's not complicated. It's actually, I believe, as the world we live in is becoming more and more complicated, the solutions are actually remarkably and surprisingly simple. And they are often cheap, they're accessible, they're successful, and they're sustainable. With a little bit of, if we can convert, Brent, information to knowledge, then we are really empowering people to rise above those confusing health messages.
In your book on the chapter, which is chapter 12 in nutrition, you say everything you place in, on, or near your body has the potential to nourish. And you say principle number one, nutrient-dense food should be your guiding principle. Nutrient-dense food. What do you mean by that?
Well, nutrient-dense food, look, the human body, you remember when we were in high school, there was the periodic table, 118 elements. Well, the human body needs something like 50 or 60 of those elements, as well as some what are called essential fatty acids, and they're called essential because we can't make them. That is things like omega-6 and omega-3, which people will have heard about. They're called essential fatty acids. There are also some essential amino acids because proteins are made up of 20 or 22 amino acids, but about 8 or 9 of them are essential because we can't make them, so we have to consume them. So a nutrient-dense diet has those 50 or 60 elements, has the essential fatty acids, has the essential amino acids. And for that to happen, you've really got to grow food in nutrient-dense soils, in healthy soils. You can make food look really good just by putting 3 chemicals or 4 chemicals on the land, and up comes the soil, up comes the plant, and you think that looks fine. But does it contain those 50 or 60 elements? And that's where healthy soils are very important. That's why we all should be engaged in how our food is grown. And that's what nutrient-dense means, that it contains those essential nutrients.
You say healthy fats are key to combating disease. Now, I understand healthy fats, with my limited knowledge, as being things like olive oil.
Yeah, look, this is one of the things that I think has set us up for many of the problems we have today. The advice we were getting coming out of the 70s, 80s, 90s, and actually even to many today is this whole low-fat idea. And low-fat has a few problems. Firstly, we have lived our entire evolutionary history, we've had a relationship with fats, and they've been a very important part of our diet. As soon as you go on to low fat, the first thing that will happen is you'll become hungry, which means you'll eat a lot more food, which is great for selling food, and it's great marketing, but it's not very good for our health. So fats are a critically important compound to every cell in our body, every nerve in our body, every hormone in our body. Our brain there's a lot of fat in our brain, so healthy fats are really important. And by that, I mean natural fats. And let me make it simple. I personally would exclude seed oils from that. I know they are promoted as a healthy option, and there is good reason why they are promoted as a healthy option, because they last a lot longer on the supermarket shelf, and they will last a lot longer in processed food products. So if you can promote seed oils like sunflower, safflower, canola oil as a healthy fat, then that makes good marketing sense, but it actually doesn't make good health sense. So to me, healthy fats are, as you said, olive oil's very good, butter is good. I think the fat from animals that have been raised in ethically grown ways on healthy soils are good. The interesting thing is, this will get us onto the topic of protein too, but the interesting thing is the way they fatten animals up prior to taking them to market is to feed them lots and lots of grains and to put on as much fat as possible. And they do that in pens, not out on the pasture. So the fats that you eat from from industrial meat production are often not the healthiest of fats. And so, again, animals and fats that are grown on healthy soils are what I would call healthy fats, natural fats.
That's why, when given the choice of grain-fed or grass-fed, in reference to beef, if you can afford it, you're always better to go with grass-fed rather than grain-fed. Am I correct in saying that?
You are, but, the interesting thing is we will often see in the butcher 150-day grain-fed beef or 300-day grain-fed beef, and the longer the grain feeding, the more expensive the meat. I would not even touch that kind of meat, to be honest. I understand why it's done, because it adds weight for the farmer, and that's good, and it's more predictable for the chef in the restaurant. I get that too. But in terms of natural, grass-fed ends up being a leaner meat, number one, so there's a good thing. It's not riddled with fat, But also in nature, when things are grass-fed, there's a balance between, I said, essential fatty acids. Now, they are omega-6, which actually is slightly inflammatory, and omega-3, which is slightly anti-inflammatory. And when meat is grass-fed and finished, that means up to the point that it dies, then the balance between those anti-inflammatory and inflammatory fats between the omega-3 and the omega-6 are around 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 or 3-to-1. When you put an animal into a feedlot and feed it 300-day grain or 150-day grain, it is almost exclusively omega-6 fats, and that is pro-inflammatory. So when you hear someone say red meat is inflammatory, my next question to them is, how was the meat grown? How was the meat finished? I mean, when things are grown well, when meat is grown in an ethical way, then the animal should have only one bad day in its life. When we start going into industrial animal agriculture, we are starting to do things which are not good for the animal, are not good for the planet, are not good for the food, and are not good for us. So, it's all connected.
What are some of the things in the body that fat is essential for? For example, I know that fat is essential for healthy skin and hair.
Every cell in our body is a phospholipid membrane. So, there is the lipid, the fat there. Our nerves require fat to work properly. Our hormones require fat to be produced. I mean, this is a really important aspect to absolutely almost every function in the body. So fats are everywhere. And as I said, our brain, I think, there's so much fat in our brain. So to be on a low-fat diet it just has set us up for some of the many, many problems of obesity, diabetes, etc. that we have today.
What about sugar? Oh dear, he had to bring it up. What about sugar?
Well, look, the dental profession has been talking about sugar for the last 60 or 70 years and telling people not to eat it. And I recently had the pleasure of talking to Sarah Wilson, who wrote that fabulous book, I Quit Sugar. And Sarah's a patient of ours, and I said to Sarah many, many times, you have done more with your I Quit Sugar program than the dental profession have in the last 70 years. Sugar is unnecessary. Sugar is, I know it says, you can have 5 to 6 teaspoons of sugar a day. Now, for people who want to start measuring that, every teaspoon of sugar weighs 4 grams. So a can of soft drink or a can of or a bottle of juice, a 600 ml bottle of juice, will have something like 10 teaspoons of sugar in it. The average Australian eats something like 27 kilograms of sugar a year. So, that's quite a lot.
It is 27 kilos of sugar a year.
Yeah. So it's a bit of a, that's not a good thing. There's no reason for it. I know it's very addictive. It actually could be described as an anti-nutrient. So nutrients are something that we use every single second of our lives in processes that go on in every cell in our body. But sugar could be actually described as an anti-nutrient because it interferes with so many normal functions, not to mention puts on weight, not to mention makes us more insulin resistant, and therefore it makes us more susceptible to diabetes, which is a huge and growing problem. I mean, at any one time, we should only have about 4 to 8 grams of glucose floating around in our bloodstream at any one time. If you consume any more than that, then it gets stored as glycogen. It's called glycogen, and it gets stored in the liver. And there's about 300 or 400 grams of sugar or carbohydrate that gets stored there. And then after that, the body starts storing it as fat. And so, when we have too much glucose, too much sugar, it creates all sorts of problems, and you only have to look at the history or the statistics around heart disease, cancer. Here's an interesting one. The cancer, when somebody has cancer, they go in for a PET scan. And what a PET scan is, they know that cancer cells love glucose. So they inject radioactive glucose into your body, and they ask you to lie still on the table for about 10 minutes so your muscles won't get the glucose. and they know that glucose will preferentially be taken up by this radioactive glucose, and then they take an image, and that tells them where the cancer is. So it makes sense to me that if cancer cells love glucose, and we know that because we use that diagnostically all the time, then actually reducing our sugar intake would be a very, very good preventive measure. And certainly if you had a disease, particularly like cancer, you'd be avoiding it.
Now, when we talk about sugar, we're talking about sugary drinks, we're talking about, eating too many cakes, we're talking about eating too many biscuits. So it's just not the white raw sugar that you might put in a cup of tea or in a cup of coffee. It's all sorts of things. And see, there's so much hidden sugar in the supermarket shelves. There's the obvious sugar, of course. You buy a chocolate bar, there's sugar in it. But there's so much hidden sugar in things that we buy in everyday items on the shelves of the supermarkets too.
Yes, and look, another thing that people, and this goes back to basic biochemistry that every doctor, dentist, health practitioner studied in second year undergraduate degree, and that is carbohydrates, particularly the more starchy carbohydrates like potatoes, like carrots, like, sweet potatoes a little less, but or things like pasta or rice. These are very high in carbohydrates, which very quickly the body breaks down to sugar, to glucose, and then it has to deal with it either as glycogen or fat. So we all know that. That's not rocket science. And actually there's a wonderful app that people can go on and get. It's called Defeat Diabetes, and it is a wonderful resource that is available because you mentioned one of the confusing things, which we probably should discuss, is should you be on a high carb, a low carb, a high fat, a low fat? This is where carbohydrates as well as sugars is a very important part of this picture.
Okay, let me ask you, we share our bodies and particularly our digestive tract with microbes, right? But there are good and there are bad microbes. Why do they matter so much in our system?
Oh boy, this is probably the biggest thing that has happened in healthcare in the last 15 or 20 years. Because for many, many years we've taken a very adversarial approach to microbes. Everything should be antimicrobial, killing 99.9% of this. So the mouth rinse that you have kills 99.9%. We have 50 trillion cells in our body. We have probably 10 times that amount of microbes in our body. So you could argue that we are nothing more than a vehicle for microbes. And when you put something in your mouth or on your body, but in your mouth particularly, you should be asking yourself, are you feeding your friends or your foe? For example, in the mouth, the oral microbiome is made up of at least 700 different microbes. Now, they are in balance. And that balance maintains good health. As soon as we start feeding the foes and not the friends, then we start to increase their number, and they are the more virulent type of bacteria, which secretes acid, which could make a hole in the tooth. The hardest part of your body decays because of what you eat. Imagine that. And so this is all about, are you feeding your friends and your foes? In our gut, there are literally trillions of microbes, and they help us break down food which we otherwise couldn't break down ourselves, and they create nutrients which we otherwise couldn't make ourselves. So feeding our friendly microbiome is a really important part of our picture. And actually, interestingly, Brent, I'm very interested in agriculture, particularly regenerative agriculture, and there are so many similarities between the oral microbiome, the gut microbiome, and the soil microbiome. The more resilient all three of those are, the more diverse they are, the more resilient and the healthier the person and the soil and the gut and the mouth will be. So with diversity comes resilience, and with resilience comes health. So our relationship with microbes is really important, and we've got to learn to live with them and enable the good, and so not get too preoccupied with being, I know this is an odd thing to say in this day and age, but we have overdone our preoccupation with killing every microbe we can get our hands on, either in the mouth, in the gut, or in the soil.
Just quickly, because I've got to go, but lastly, the probiotics that you can buy at you drink these little milk things, Yakults, I think they're called. Are they good for your gut or not, or are they just an advertising marketing thing?
I think they're largely a marketing thing. I think a really good way of feeding the microbiome is to feed them healthy food and to try and feed your friends. You can certainly have fermented foods like sauerkraut or kimchi or things like that, but I think some of these other products tend to also be higher in sugar. So I think it's not rocket science. Things that are natural are generally good. Things that are low in sugar and preservatives are generally good. Things that are good for animals are generally good for us. So, there are simple guiding principles, and support people who are doing the right thing on the land. That's really important.
Dr. Ross, our time is I called you Dr. Ross, Dr. Ron. Our time is up. We will talk to you again next week. We thoroughly look forward to it. And as we said, we've got a copy of the book, A Life Less Stress by Dr. Ron Ehrlich to give away. If you've got a question for Dr. Ron, send it to us. You can go to the 2SM website, or you can go to the local one here in Newcastle, 2hd.com.au. Send your question in. We'll pick out the best question. We'll ask the other questions, of course, to Dr. Ron next week, and the best question, we'll send out a copy of the book. Always a delight and treat to talk to you. Have a great week. We'll talk to you next week, Dr. Ron.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, Brent.